again, everyone. I'm Plastics News Conference Director Joe Pryweller. Welcome to the second Fireside Chat for 2020 in our ongoing series of conversations on key industry topics relevant to our processor community. These discussions are fueled by M. Holland Company and produced by Plastics News, which also posts each Fireside Chat on its website. We're excited to bring this discussion to you in live video and allow you to interact with our presenters. You have the option to submit questions at any time during this chat. They will be answered in the order received at the tail end of the discussion. Just click on the Q&A icon on the side of your computer screen, and then type in your question. We look forward to your participation and to some compelling questions. The U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement, using the acronym USMCA, officially took effect on July 1st of this year. It will have a significant impact on the plastics industry, bottom lines, and compliance requirements. It could increase the stability of Mexico-U.S. trade relations, valued at $614.5 billion in 2019. But it also comes with its own set of challenges related to complying with the agreement's details, enforcement, and uncertainty over trade relations. Today, our panelists will discuss the details of the USMCA, its impact thus far, the future of the agreement, and what it means for business, industry, and economic entities. With us today to discuss the impact of the USMCA are experts from both Mexico and the United States who can provide insights from each side of the border and the agreement's effects. First, we have two speakers from Plante Moran, a leading international consulting firm with offices in both the United States and Mexico. Lou Longo is partner in the International Consulting Practice Group at Plante Moran. For nearly 3 decades, Lou has built and formed trusted partnerships with clients. He has been instrumental in helping Plante Moran open offices in Shanghai, China, Mumbai, India, and Monterrey, Mexico. Also from Plante Moran is Alejandro Rodriguez, Principal Country Manager for Mexico. Alejandro specializes in helping clients explore, establish, start up, operate business ventures in Mexico and Latin America. We also have 2 speakers from M. Holland Company today. With us is Dwight Morgan, Executive Vice President for Corporate Development with M. Holland Company. Dwight is responsible for strategic planning, mergers and acquisitions, corporate development, and marketing processes. He also oversees M. Holland's international operations. Also from M. Holland Company is Eugenio Calderon, Vice President International. Eugenio is responsible for overseeing M. Holland's international business in Mexico and Latin America, while coordinating the international expansion of its distribution and resale business units. A native of Mexico, Eugenio has held several management and executive roles both in the U.S. and Latin America. Let's now turn the conversation over to our 4 experts. Let's start today by taking a high-level look at where USMCA has landed and what it means. Was there a clear winner in the finalized USMCA? Dwight, do you want to kick off today's discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think there is a clear winner, and it's the region. It's all 3 countries. We were, I think we've got a great proxy for the importance of regional trade and the trade bloc with NAFTA, which, while it created some disruption initially, by every measure created jobs, expanded international trade, strengthened the trade bloc, and we were facing the possible loss of NAFTA. So USMCA, I think, is a very important stabilizing step for the region, and I think it's going to be particularly important going forward as other regional blocs emerge, like the Pacific Trade Agreement. We have blocs in Asia and elsewhere that are going to be formidable, the EEC, obviously. So I think that it was vitally important that we get it in place, and it was a difficult process to get here, but a very important step forward and very stabilizing.
It's definitely then a collaborative effort between all three countries, it sounds like, that benefited everybody. Is that correct?
I don't know. You know, there are still many strains within the region and nationally or internationally. We have a lot of trade tension that's ongoing. I think it's indicative of that is the fact that all three of the countries have a different name for what we call USMCA. Canada calls it the CUSMA. Mexico calls it MTEC. So I think it's indicative of the sense of nationalism and some of the global trade strains that the companies all have given this a very local name. I think it's also unfortunate that within weeks of finally getting this approved after 14 months of negotiation, we've imposed aluminum tariffs on Canada under a national defense explanation. But fundamentally, the agreement is very sound, very solid, and a big improvement, I think, over NAFTA. It really updates it.
What's the Mexican perspective on that, Alejandro, as far as the agreement and any trade tensions that might remain?
So I would agree 100%. North America as a region is the clear winner here. It was a very long and sometimes even tense negotiation process. There were times that we didn't even know if we were going to have an agreement. So again, I think people were really relieved. Maybe some celebrated as well. But I think the fact that we have an agreement and we know that the agreement is going to be in place for at least 16 years, it's going to eliminate that uncertainty that we had for the last maybe 24, 36 months. Going to really allow companies to make decisions about how they're going to grow, where they're going to go. So I think it's again, clear winner is North America. And like any other trade agreement, the main purpose of the agreement is to promote free and fair trade among the three countries. And I think that is what the new USMCA or TMEC or CUSMA, depending on where you are in the world, is going to really accomplish for the region itself. And again, I think it's going to really position North America to be able to compete with other regions as well.
Are we achieving some of the goals of striking the right balance between where goods are produced and some of the cost outcomes from that?
I think that's going to take time. Companies are going to start to make decisions as a result of, obviously, the changes on USMCA, the rules. And we do expect to have some shifts and changes in the supply chain to reach that balance. Again, what the three countries wanted to do was to reach a balance, and I think that's going to take time. Automotive industry is one big example. The new rules for automotive are going to phase in over 5 years. So I think that is going to allow companies and the whole automotive supply chain to really reestablish itself and realign to accomplish those new rules and goals.
Great. Well, I guess another question that comes up is, well, North America will it be in a better position to compete globally against other countries with this? Lou, do you want to start with that off?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to comment on that. I think what we've seen really in global trade over the last 3 decades in particular is there's been a regionalization. You know, there was a point at which when China actually got WTO favored nation status, that there was this rush to China as the factory of the world. And, we were going to have a single location serving manufacturing for the entire world. We've seen a number of disruptions in that, right? We've seen, the unfortunate Fukushima incident in Japan and the impact to supply chains of that occurrence. We've even seen some issues here in the COVID era on medical device concentration. And what's happened over that time frame now is supply chains are looking more at a regional focus. So where are the consumers at? and where are the bases and centers of manufacturing to support those consumer groups, and looking at more on a regional focus. So by being able to have USMCA come together, and we can have this block where we can have a significant amount of consumers and consumer capital, as well as manufacturing at a reasonable cost basis on a combination with intellectual property protections, we now can support manufacturing, strong plastics industry, have export opportunities to other regions of the world, with also having our own base of manufacturing. That's going to allow us to compete with the rest of Latin America, with Europe and Asia, the ascending Asia. So I think, just like Dwight said, this is a huge win for the region. And in the U.S. in particular, quite candidly, it's going to make manufacturing in the U.S. much stronger by having this opportunity and supporting our U.S. Exporting opportunities, really, to combat what has happened in terms of shift towards Asian production. So yes, for sure, this makes us globally more competitive.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's timely that we have this in place right now. With the pandemic has certainly challenged supply chains, and it's got every major company examining this drive for, maximum efficiency over the last, 20 years. They're starting to look more at optimization of the supply chain, which means regionalization. And then the other thing you can't ignore is the trade tensions between Western governments and China right now. China is starting to look more inward for their economic growth. Last year, their percentage of total exports was 25%. It's 22% this year. So we're seeing shifts already. Now, some of that's going to the Vietnams of the world at manufacturing, but certainly we're well positioned now for some reshoring of manufacturing capability. And I think that it was very important that we get the new agreement in place.
Outside of issues with China and reshoring, are there other incentives such as sourcing and production efficiencies that are also part of this? I know Eugenio, you were talking about this previously.
Yeah. What we've learned from talking to customers and connections, in the region, all agree USMCA positions or repositions North America, leading manufacturing region in the world, not limited to automotive, but certainly as one of the most impacted sectors. There is a recognition that we can better compete with other automotive players like Japan and Germany, certainly China, right? But also recognize and welcome the necessary changes that the agreement needed. I think the fundamental principle that remained consistent before and after the USMCA, among people we had the chance to share insights, is that, the automotive sector, especially with the U.S. being the second producer, largest producer, Mexico number 6, Canada number 12, makes these region very close to, let's say, Japan, Germany, and India combined, who are number 3, 4, and 5 largest producers in the automotive sector. So then think of the geographies. The team has been saying this. The geographies we're comparing here, the value supply chain integration, transportation efficiencies, even culture, some degree language, right? And the access to free trade agreements that Mexico has with a lot of countries around the globe really positions the region in a great place to continue to compete globally. But again, recognizing that the agreement needed some updating. So I think the region is in its better shape ever to compete globally on many sectors, automotive being one of those.
Certainly, and we have strong depth in our supply chain. That helps too, right? Alejandro, I know you mentioned that previously also. Is that going to help us a bit?
So just the depth of the supply chain that we have in North America, and just as an example, even in plastics and in automotive, we know for a fact that components cross even 6 times borders, Mexico, U.S. and Canadian borders before getting into a final assembled vehicle. So, for example, resin could move from the U.S. into Mexico. A part can be molded or injected in Mexico and then shipped all the way to Canada. That part then moves into a different component into the U.S. and then that's sent to Mexico where it's assembled into a vehicle that is sold in the U.S. So again, having this agreement in place really allows us to have that level of complex supply chains that work, because otherwise we would not be able to be, again, competitive and be able to compete against other regions in automotive and other sectors and industries as well.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the agreement at this point. And compliance, I know, is an issue and something everybody has to work on, and therein might lie the rub with some of this anyway. I know some people probably errantly are calling this the new NAFTA, and I know that a few of you might have a bone to pick with that. So I'll let you guys talk about whether this is a update on NAFTA or something completely different.
Yeah,
Go
well,
ahead.
I hate that term. So you really picked one that is a major pet peeve for me. It bothers me every time I hear someone say that, because if you spend any time with the agreement, you will see that it's so fundamentally different. The parties are the same. That's about one of the few things you can say is that the parties are the same. The general concept is the same. But NAFTA compared to USMCA, NAFTA was an agreement to kind of play nice together. Okay, we're gonna have this framework. USMCA has very specific compliance requirements and has very specific ways in which you need to comply. And it has changed the way there's specific methodology you need to follow to be able to comply with it. And my grave concern in the supply chain is that there are too many suppliers, too many manufacturers, too many companies that are purchasing goods that I speak to that are saying, oh, we were fine under NAFTA, we're fine under USMCA, without doing any investigation. And they don't understand what the actual compliance rules are. So this agreement has teeth to it. It has teeth all the way along for compliance and penalties in it. It has new and higher requirements for regional content and value that's going to be tracked. And it is true that there's going to be some kind of a lag here of letting people get compliant, but it's going to come back. So, I don't want to take all the time. I know my colleagues here have other comments to share, but boy, I did want to jump in because please don't refer to it. It is a new agreement. Spend the time to get into it for all those that are attending today. If you're going to tell me it doesn't apply, at least tell me that you've gotten into it and you're very, very confident. You've done the due diligence. If you've done the due diligence, then I'm happy. But you got to do the due diligence.
Yeah, I had
you finding that your client's a little bit too complacent about this sometimes?
Well, yeah, and in the era of COVID, candidly, I can understand. They have a lot going on, but I get paid to worry about things for my clients, candidly, and so I'm worried because it's the kind of thing that a year from now they get a notice of non-compliance and a huge bill because they just didn't pay attention. So I'm trying to be out in the marketplace like this, saying, I know you don't want to pay attention to it, but we kind of have to. We have to do at least the minimum.
What do you say with your clients, Dwight, with some of this? Are they?
Well, I had a call from a colleague who was working on a paper, and he called and said, this USMCA, I'm working on this paper, and can I call this USMCA? And I said, well, it depends. But if you're going to be talking about it in Mexico or Canada, it's got a different name. And he said, well, I'll just call it the new NAFTA. And I said, don't do that because Lou will come down on you.
Thank you, Dwight. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, I think we're in a situation with the pandemic where companies are really preoccupied with other priorities right now. So And this has come on very quickly. You know, typically NAFTA was signed in 92 and didn't take effect till 94. This thing came down so fast, and the rules are still being sort of determined. Our regulatory group says that the paperwork changes are significant. There's a lot of a lack of instruction, so it's a bit chaotic right now. And having started this thing in the middle of the year, all the companies that are working like mad to comply right now with the reporting requirements and so forth, they're going to have to go through that same thing again come January. So it is a very, very formidable situation right now for many firms. Now, that said, it's, automotive is clearly the most effective industry by this. So.
Yeah, I guess that's what I want to get into, Dwight. What are some of the primary compliance rules, especially for automotive, that a company needs to look forward to and look at right now anyway? Whoever wants to handle that.
I'm happy to jump in, Joe. So
Sure.
Automotive, for sure, obviously, it's a very important industry, not only for Mexico, the U.S., or Canada. I think Eugenio, with his comments and numbers, he hit the nail on the head. It's a critical industry for North America. So I think, obviously, the three governments knew that when they were negotiating, and that is the industry that has the most impact. So as just quickly summarizing, we have the increase in regional value content for passenger vehicles, for example, where it goes from 62.5% to 75%. That is a huge increase. So it means that 12.5% of a vehicle that is being manufactured in North America that had parts coming from outside, it's going to now have to relocate and be manufactured in North America. That's a huge change. And then we also have these two new rules, the labor value content and the steel and aluminum. The steel and aluminum rule, I'm going to leave labor value content for the end, but steel and aluminum, these two rules apply only to the OEMs. The OEMs, or the manufacturer of passenger vehicles, need to comply. Because they need to comply, obviously that's going to trickle down to their supply chain. So it is going to have an impact on their supply chain. But the labor content rule, for example, which states that 40% of a vehicle needs to be manufactured or on a facility or in a region that has at least $16 per hour on labor rates, that essentially means the U.S. and Canada. So that portion is going to be essentially manufactured in the U.S. and Canada. Again, this rule applies to the OEMs only, but the suppliers are going to be able to support those OEMs to comply with this rule and meet this threshold.
So go ahead.
There's a strategic. I just always like to point this out because you can look at the negative side of that and say, and what I mean by negative is, now if you're not compliant, you need to become compliant. But in the supply chain, you have an opportunity. So you can look at this and say, okay, my ultimate customers need to meet these. The ultimate OEMs need to meet these. How can I position my business? And especially if I'm an American business, how can I position myself to be supplier of choice and use my facilities to be able to provide more content that meets the value levels and meets the $16 per hour labor rates to help my ultimate customer. So there's a consideration here, not just meeting the USMCA requirements, but it's also thinking through the strategy of how ultimately do I help my customer. And then finally, Alejandro, maybe you might want to discuss this idea. Dwight brought up the Nafta certificates, and now the idea of the lack of a new requirement, because that's a compliance issue that we get a lot of phone calls about. And I think there's a risk here for some of our attendees on what they might be getting asked for from the supply chain. Maybe you might want to cover that.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, just very quickly on the under NAFTA, there were the old NAFTA certificates that companies needed to complete in order to be able to be compliant. That NAFTA certificate essentially went away. It does not longer exist after June 30th. USMCA calls for what they call certifying documents. So there's not an official form that's being released. They just essentially state that a document needs to have 9 data elements in order to be or serve as a certifying document. Again, you can create this form, you can create any type of document as long as it has this information, it complies with USMCA rules to act as a certifying document. And the risk that Luis is talking about, and again, we have been having a lot of conversations with our clients, is they're getting what they call solicitations from their customers requesting a lot more than those 9 elements. So companies need to be careful and not to fall into that trap of providing more information that's actually required to be in compliance. And again, these could be labor costs, costs of suppliers, a lot of different things that, again, your customers could include on a solicitation, but you are not required to provide in order to comply with the new USMCA rules. I don't know, Dwight, or if any of you have been seeing that with your customers.
Well, I mean, I'll bring some light relative to compliance to a segment that will be very interesting to understand and support moving forward. So the electronics market. And I'll use printed circuit boards as the example of a sub-segment within electronics that, by the way, they use a lot of specialty plastics, but also touches many other markets. There is an increasing content of power electronics to make all types of products, more technologically advanced and connected and all of that. For automotive, aerospace, appliance, consumer goods, healthcare. And again, these products go into sub-assemblies, final products that are extensively traded in North America. And this industry was already going through such rapid change before the USMCA and before COVID-19, very, very dynamic supply-demand environment. And this year it faced significant supply chain disruption, like other segments did. And I know they are strategizing right now on how the future looks like for them. Because some markets that were historically very strong for them, like aerospace and automotive, changing, and others that were not as strong for them, healthcare, consumer goods, and others are probably getting a boost. And so relative to compliance, it will be a very interesting segment to watch for 2 things, not only because of the fast-growing number of products that need to be more connected with more power electronics and software in them, but also especially because of how high up in the bill of material these PCBs are. And so, again, I think it's very early now, but to some of the comments Lou and Alejandro were making, it will be interesting to understand deep into their supply chains relative to origin of content, and then how that plays into a lot of other products, right? Automotive being only one of them, but every product that has PCBs inside, usually these counts for a high piece of their bill of material. So I think it's going to be an evolving kind of a compliance journey for them and many other markets that are going to be buying from them.
Yeah, in certain industries, the supply chain managers have to be chess players now.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Yes, 100%.
Very complex sub-assembly chain that needs assessment.
Let's talk about some of their applications and parts of this agreement a little bit. First of all, applications, and medical might be one affected possibly. I know a lot of it's coming from China right now, and could that be coming here? Is this going to be an effect of this agreement on medical packaging devices, other applications for medical?
I think you need to talk in terms of the benefits to smaller companies. This has some significant benefits to smaller companies, this agreement. I think there's a whole chapter devoted to SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. So you're going to have right now. You don't necessarily need to be registered or have a company or registered, rep in the country to do business in country, so you can start to provide services across borders. The de minimis export restrictions have been raised in Mexico and Canada, so smaller shipments into those countries will be duty-free and depending on the thresholds, tax-free. So there's a lot of advantages for small companies right now. And I think another positive is you have a lot more protections than, for example, doing business in China. Right now, the agreement on digital technology and trade recognizes digital trade, digital products as trade. And it also prohibits any of the countries from taking your code, from forcing you onto local platforms, which can be very expensive. So these are things that if you're doing business in China and other places, you may have encountered pressure from governments. And so you can do business as even a smaller or medium-sized enterprise with a lot more security and a better sense of security than perhaps doing business elsewhere in the world. I don't know, Lou, and Alejandro, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I agree, and we've heard multiple times that this new USMCA, at least from a U.S. perspective, is going to be used as the framework for any and all future agreements that they have. So they're going to include SMEs, environmental, telecom, e-commerce. They want to make it very broad, and they're going to negotiate with the UK very soon. They're going to negotiate with Japan, with the European Union, and they're going to use the basics or the basis of the USMCA, how they actually drafted this, and implemented with the specific regions or countries that they're going to go out and deal with now. So I think it really, again, we need to also go back and understand that NAFTA was a 26-year-old agreement. Internet was starting back then. We didn't have e-commerce. We didn't have telecom, software. There were a lot of things that were not part of NAFTA. So, and I'm going back to what I mentioned about certainty. The USMCA stipulates that it's going to be reviewed every 6 years. So that's going to really avoid the same thing from happening again in 30 years. So that's not going to happen. It's going to be continuously updated to make sure it addresses changes and new industries. And for example, in automotive, what we're going to see with electrification and electric vehicles, it's going to start adjusting to that as every review happens.
Go ahead, Lou.
So I was just going to say, I've heard some comment about a concern about the 6-year review. I actually see that as a good thing, because I think when you go 26 years, you get to a point where it's so out of whack that you can say it's an agreement that could fall apart. Every 6 years, you have less likelihood of the issues being so significant that they can't be negotiated reasonably amongst the parties. So that's just my personal view. Is I actually think the 6-year review is a good thing. Now, I've heard it said that that's a concern for some. Just my view.
I don't think the concern is necessarily with the 6-year review as much as with the expiration date, because this thing expires in 16 years if it's not extended formally. So I think that the NAFTA had no expiration date. This does have an expiration date, and that could dissuade particularly significant capital investment. When NAFTA, was questioned. I mean, when that happened, we have investments, of course, in Mexico, and there was just pretty much a shutdown of new capital investment in Mexico. I mean, foreign investors were just not going to invest. So I suspect that people will have to be mindful of that 16-year, cliff as they make long-term investment decisions.
Yeah, Dwight, I agree with you. Trust me, in the business that we're in, we saw that. We saw the tap shut off on new investments. Alejandro and I felt it very specifically. I guess my comment to that is this last, our current administration showed that even though there wasn't an expiration date, there was always an expiration date.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess my view is the 16 years doesn't really, but my view on that is that 16 years doesn't mean all that much. And the idea of renegotiating every 6, I hope, helps make that 16 years less meaningful. Is kind of my point. It's sort of the 3 coming together saying, this is critical to the region. We're going to keep working at it every 6 years. And maybe that's just, looking at it half full versus half empty. I don't know.
Yeah. No. I think that's valid. And that's a good point. Permanent doesn't mean permanent, and
Exactly.
Yeah, no question. You mentioned environmental too, Alejandro. I know that Plante Moran has worked a little bit on some of the sustainability and environmental requirements with some of this, and how does that relate to the agreement?
Do you want to touch that?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. There's all.
Sure.
Oh, go ahead, Dwight. No, please go ahead, Dwight.
No, I mean, I know they've been, there are some emission rules relative to trucks in Mexico. But I'm not familiar with much more of the detail.
Yeah, so there's a whole chapter 24 of the agreement touched on sustainability. I guess here's how I would phrase it. So this would be my commentary on it. It's trying to catch up 26 years worth of not having anything on sustainability. So it's not forward looking. It doesn't set goals. It talks about things like, worrying about the environment, worrying about recycling, reuse, are all objectives of each of the 3 parties, clearly. And so it's basically getting current to say these are issues of common concern that we need to be all aware of, and we agree. If we are going to, any party is going to make any legislation, significant moves, the other parties have a right of review, a right of commentary. If there is a dispute because of something one of the parties has, there is a dispute resolution mechanism, but it doesn't set any goals. It doesn't, say we're going to, as a group, do something in a certain sense. So my view is it's a move to catch up, to go from really not 26 years ago not being a focus to saying today it's a focus of our society, and this is where we're at, and we'll see in 6 years kind of where they are on that, Joe. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
I don't know if others have comments on that.
So the only thing I would add is it wasn't the main things that they wanted to renegotiate. So again, they were more worried about automotive, manufacturing, commerce, energy, telecom. Environmental, I agree with Louis, was mainly just catching up and putting it there and creating that chapter 24 on the USMCA document.
Well, a few minutes left before we get to questions here. Let me get to a few other areas. Suppliers are probably a little concerned about how they're going to comply with some of this, as COVID-19 is plays large on their minds at the moment. Is there issues that they have to do this right now immediately too, along with worrying about COVID, how that's affecting their business, or is there more of a buffer time for some of this?
So I'm happy to comment, and we know that obviously the agreement entered into force almost or a little more than a month and a half ago. Something that was it was really, to be honest, really unexpected for a trade agreement to get implemented mid-year. That was really unusual. Again, I think it was as a result of the 3 governments trying to just reactivate the economy and just get people ready and moving and taking advantage of USMCA. The CBP, the U.S. Customs Border Protection, released the general implementation rule maybe a few days prior to July 1st. And something that it's actually part of that document, they're calling the period between July 1st and December 31st, 2020 as phase 1 implementation. And I'm going to try and use the exact words they use, that they essentially mentioned that they understand the challenges that companies are going to face in order to comply with the rules and regulations of the new agreement. And during this period, they're going to refrain from enforcing. So that means it obviously doesn't say that this is a grace period and nothing is going to happen, but they're going to understand if they do find issues and they approach a company and understand that they're trying to work on getting in compliance, they're going to try and understand. Companies need to start working. They need to work. So January 1st, 2021, they're fully compliant with USMCA and the other steps that they need to follow. It could be a daunting process. Again, we're trying to support our clients by simplifying that process in maybe 4 simple steps.
Great. Last question. I'm curious, what do suppliers need to do right now to get ready for this? How should they familiarize themselves with this? What kind of systems should they be thinking about? I guess they shouldn't be complacent. We already talked about that a little bit.
Yes, and if you allow me, Joe, let me just try and summarize it in 4 different steps. The first thing is you really need to understand what your finished good at the harmonized tariff schedule level. You need to understand the HTS code that your finished good has, because that is going to essentially determine the rules of origin that are going to apply to that specific product, meaning the regional value content that you need to hit in order to qualify that product. Understanding what changes from NAFTA to USMCA to SMCA is going to be critical in order to avoid having companies think that because the product qualified under NAFTA, it automatically qualifies under USMCA. So understanding those differences is going to be critical. And then completing the calculation, the actual calculation for regional value content. You need to have a very detailed bill of materials that's updated and that really shows how you're manufacturing a product. So you can complete the calculation and understand how much of that product is manufactured with value or from that region. And then that is going to determine if it qualifies or not. And then the last part, which again, it's really important and we touch a little bit on, is documenting everything. You have to have documents to be able to show in case of an audit that you actually understand your product, you qualified it, and it complies with the new USMCA regulation.
I would just like to add real quickly to that a concern that in the supply chain, and talking about those SMEs, those producers in the supply chain, in their terms and conditions for their larger clients, customers, they're going to be held responsible, whether it's pointed out or not. Those terms and conditions are going to be updated by their attorneys to show that they're accepting responsibility for being compliant with USMCA. And if 2 years from now, there's an audit at the customer level, and it trickles down and finds out that you weren't compliant, the cost that is going to be laid on that supplier is going to be huge. This is a provision now. That's why this isn't the new NAFTA. That's why this is very different. This is why your business could be at risk out into the future, and you need to do this due diligence. And we've seen companies that have told us, hey, we buy in the U.S., we sell in the U.S., we're compliant, this doesn't matter. And when we go look at their harmonized tariff code that they told us they qualified under, they're using the wrong harmonized tariff code. So their own due diligence was wrong, and they didn't qualify. They don't qualify under USMCA. So again, I'm sorry I'm preaching a little hard today, but it's coming from the work we've done. We have enough stories that are telling us we just don't want people to get burned. That's all it is. It's just don't get burned. Just verify. What's that line? Trust but verify. Sorry, Dwight.
No, sure. One question, Lou. So would you say, you mentioned earlier, so tactically there's some work to do on existing products in the supply chain, across the supply chain, all tiers. Now, strategically, and some of these industries are so cost-driven, right? Compliance will be a new element to consider. besides cost. I assume there's going to be, especially for new product development, new designs, etc., a lot of clients will be another filter.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It goes back to what you and Dwight were saying about, the purchasing and supply chain people now need to be chess masters. I mean, this is part of it as well. And to me, that's also part of you in the supply chain strategically making it easier for your customers can make you a preferred supplier. The better you're handling this, the more you're able to make it easy for your customer because, hey, we've got this down and we know this well. And you make it easy for them. You become an easy supplier for them and you're competing with somebody else. Who do you think they're going to want to work with? Right?
That's a great point.
Right.
That's a great point.
This could be leveraged not outweigh not complying down the road.
Yeah. Everybody's looking for that little bit of a leg up, and so it's like we can look at it as it's another thing to do, but it again, to me, everything that's a challenge is an opportunity to differentiate and make yourself more valuable. So
on the cautionary side too, the regulators on this are still sorting this out as well. This has come very quickly, so the rules are not fully understood yet. So you want to be careful.
Well, and Dwight, I think you've raised a great point here. We're focusing on plastics. This is the time to be involved with your industry also. So your industry can have influence on those rules. Your industry, as it's getting into these rules and understanding how they apply, can impact the USTR in its negotiations and in its discussions of application of the rules. And so, my comment would be the industry should be coming together to say, how is this impacting us as an industry in the U.S. and then throughout the region and commenting on that. Auto certainly did.
With that, we got a lot of questions that have come in, so why don't we start with some of those anyway? And these relate a lot to plastic also, and to how the industry is going to be affected by USMCA. First question: how is USMCA different than NAFTA in regards to importing resin from outside USMCA inbound to Maquiladora's facilities? Early days on NAFTA, Mexico charged a tariff. Anybody want to take that one?
I'm happy to comment, and obviously it's going to go to the HTS level, but tariffs are going to, there's no change on how that's going to be treated in Mexico, at least. That is our understanding, that that's the treatment that they're going to give it. But I think it's also important to mention, Joe, to the audience, that there are additional programs in Mexico in order to be able to reduce some of the tariffs from products that come out from outside the USMCA region. PROSEC would be one of those programs. Again, we're happy to discuss offline if PROSEC would be a possibility for this company to try and reduce any of the tariff impact from resins, or, to be honest, any other type of material that's coming into Mexico.
Here's a similar question, might be a good follow-up. Previously, plastic resin compounded in North America was not considered NAFTA if raw materials were imported. Will this change under the USMCA?
So we would need to look at the rule of origin specifically. Obviously, there's different ways at qualifying a product under USMCA, and they are similar but not the same under NAFTA that they were under NAFTA. We would need to understand if they need to reach a threshold or if the tariff shift rule is going to really apply. So based on that, we will know if actually it does qualify by importing the raw materials into the country and then making the transformation locally within the USMCA region, if that would accomplish qualifying that product.
So great. Just a little bit more on that, Alejandro, could you just explain that the tariff shift on the compounding, just so that everybody makes sure they understand that?
I know it's a technical term. The tariff shift, what essentially means is that if you're bringing a product into the USMCA region and there is transformation within the region where it changes from the HTS code heading, So if it changes from a 47 to a 50 to a different heading number, which essentially means that it was transforming to something else, value was added, then it could qualify. But again, that is why it's very important that we understand the HTS code, and based on that HTS code, we go to the specific.
A question here, how does the USMCA impact the Maquiladora program? Is there any impact on that at all with this?
There is no impact to the Maquiladora program in Mexico. Again, the Maquiladora program in Mexico is a government-sponsored program or promoted to try and allow companies in Mexico to be competitive. USMCA is not going to have any impact on the Maquiladora program or the IMX program or VAT certifications for that regard.
Great. Here's a question of differences between NAFTA and USMCA. Can you simply summarize the differences between the two, not just automotive, but some other areas where the person says here the porting form elimination will be one, that'd be different. But it's very simply put, what are the key differences outside of just the automotive requirements?
I'm happy to list a few, and then we can have the rest of the panel also share. I would share compliance, enforcement are going to be, I think, the two most important changes. Now, like Lou mentioned, companies are the three countries are going to look at what's actually being traded, and they're going to audit companies, and they're going to make sure that if you are saying that you comply and you're getting the benefits of the USMCA, you are essentially entitled to do that. So again, enforcement, compliance, reporting was also mentioned there, and we touched a little bit on this show already. Is USMCA addresses and covers many industries that were not part of NAFTA. So again, it's an update that needed to happen to include e-commerce, intellectual property, energy, telecom. So it's an update as well. And I don't know, Dwight, Eugenio, or Lou, if you want to add a few more.
No, I think you covered most of it. I would, though, also add benefits to small businesses in the U.S. and, of course, digital technology, which was totally missing from NAFTA.
Yeah, I think you guys nailed it.
Excellent. This person says, understanding that we no longer have to provide tax ID numbers for exporters and importers. However, Mexico seems to demand that these be included. Are these formally required, tax ID numbers for exporter and importers?
Yes, and that is one, actually, remember I mentioned the 9 data elements. Information on the, and again, I'm going to go a little bit technical here, but information on the certifier, importer, producer, or importer is part of those 9 elements. And those elements, the information includes obviously name, title, address, and the tax ID in the US, the RFC or RFC of a Mexican company is part of it. So the tax IDs need to still be provided. They're part of those 9 elements.
Here's a question that might relate to Dwight and Eugenio with distributors. For only distributors and domestic customers ask for USMCA, what are our responsibilities? We're neither an importer, exporter, or producer for these customers. What responsibilities does a distributor have?
Well, our regulatory team assists our customers and suppliers. We fill out the forms, we counsel, we deal with all that complexity. So we do have responsibility because we're conducting international trade, and we have to make sure that those any of those documents are there. Rules, any information on origin are connected to the product and passed on between the different people we're dealing with and conducting the transaction with. So we do have responsibility to that, and our regulatory team is all over it. We're probably going to be publishing a blog in the next few days on some of these informational changes and some of the complexities that we're dealing with on that right now to help some of our clients. So look for that.
Does the U.S. UMCA trade agreement affect the plastics packaging market for aerospace, tooling, et cetera, and some other areas? Is there an impact on that market?
You mentioned packaging and aerospace, or
aerospace? Yeah.
Aerospace. I'm not sure. I'm assuming some of those might be specialty products, but no, Alejandro, Lou, have you heard anything on packaging? Most, at least from what I have been able to learn recently, packaging and other essential applications, hygiene, hospital disposables, a lot of what we do in the region with thousands of customers really didn't change from the prior agreement to the new agreement.
Okay.
There might be, I know there are some products, depending on where the chemical reaction takes place, to what Alejandro was mentioning, depending on the type of product, there might be some implications, but I'm unsure if I think it's more product based than where it's going, regardless of that being aerospace. But with more detail, I'm sure Lou and Alejandro could help.
No, I agree. I don't see the aerospace industry is one of those industries in Mexico that's growing quite a bit, or it was growing pre-COVID a lot in Mexico. But I don't think there's any big changes. Again, just if we compare it to automotive, that we should be concerned about, and packaging not a huge concern also.
Yeah, checking the HTS codes is going to be the most critical thing there. Checking the harmonized tariff codes. That's going to tell you if there was a change.
And then one comment on the HTS code, because I think it's important. I did not mention. People think that the HTS code that you used 10 years ago is going to be. That's not really true. Actually, HTS codes are regularly updated, so it is important that you check that you are using the correct one. We need to understand that there's new product developments that happen every day. And that is why the HTS codes are regularly updated. So don't assume that because you've been using the HTS code from the last 10 years, it's going to be the same and it's going to be a valid HTS code now.
Or just because your broker assigned it 10 years ago, it's still valid.
Here's an interesting question. With the strong USMCA agreement, can you please expand on the impact on China? Will the impact be limited to China's growing investments in Mexico, the United States, et cetera?
I think.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Luke.
No, please do it. No, I'd like to hear. Go ahead.
I think that this definitely strengthens the region relative to China. I think that even without COVID, even without the specific trade tensions that we're experiencing right now, this strengthens the region relative to China. Just the predictability this provides, the intellectual property protections, the digital protections. This, I think, would give the region a advantage in dealing with China.
Also, in a lot of different markets, China is probably not as the gap between how the cost advantage you can have in China versus a place like Mexico has significantly reduced in the last 20 years.
Yes.
And if I can add, Joe, and as a result of what rightly mentioned on trade frictions, COVID, and USMCA implementation, we have spoken and we're speaking with a lot of Chinese companies that do not have any operations outside of China, looking to establish operations in North America. U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And Mexico is of particular interest to them because obviously of the cost structure and also some of the trade agreements Mexico has. So we do expect a lot of that to continue to happen. And not all companies that are asking or are interested in maybe going to move, but there are many that are going to really try and establish operations in Mexico and North America to take advantage of this USMCA. So I think that is going to be a trend that we will continue to see.
Great. Last question, are there any special compliance rules for medical in plastics? Or is it similar to what we've seen with other areas?
Nothing special. Again, we will refer back to the HTS code and understanding if it's a component or if it's a finished medical device. Based on that, an HTS will be assigned and we'll need to look at the rule of origin.
Right. So less about the segment, more about the product.
Correct.
I think that it extends patent protection on some biomedical products. So there is some additional intellectual property protection.
Last thing here too. Is there any significant changes versus the old NAFTA for plastic supply chain outside of the automotive rules, like percentage of content from high-wage countries and all of that? Or is this supposed to be settling some uncertainty around NAFTA before? Are there significant changes that way versus old NAFTA as far as supply chain goes?
Well, I think something to keep in mind is Mexico and Canada are already the two largest trading partners for the U.S. plastics industry. And the U.S. plastics sector maintains, I think, its single largest trade surplus with Mexico. And so most of those applications, just thinking about the consumers, packaging and a lot of other essential applications, there's no changes to that between the previous agreement and the new one. And double checking that with Alejandro and Lou before the Fireside chat, I think that's where not significant change. There might be some pockets with some products, depending on where they were made, that may qualify for a change, but for the most part, no change.
Great. I think at this point, we'll wrap up the questions, unless anybody else has any further comments on this besides what Eugenio mentioned here. If not, I'm going to give each of you maybe 30 seconds to give some final parting comments anyway, what you want to leave the attendees with as far as USMCA and what needs to be done. Maybe we'll start with Lou.
Again, don't call it the new NAFTA. Do your diligence. Please make sure you confirm how it applies to your products. Confirm your HTS codes. And make sure you look down your supply chain, not only up, and consider the strategic opportunities. There is opportunity here. This is good for us. Thanks.
White?
I think the agreement is a plus for the region, for the three parties, and particularly the U.S. plastics industry. We're one of the few merchandise categories that maintains a pretty significant trade surplus for the country. This allows us to do that, and generally the plastics industry, I think, favors stable rules and predictability and free and also fair trade, and I think this furthers all of those.
Alejandro?
So I'm going to be brief. I think this is a very positive thing. Having USMCA is very, very positive for North America. There's going to be challenges. Yes, like every change brings challenges, but I agree with Lou. I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities. And I would just want to leave you, if you don't have a plan to get in compliance, develop that plan and make sure that you are in compliance so you can get all the advantages of USMCA.
Great. And Eugenio?
Yeah, my takeaway, I think, is the USMCA brings certainty to investors and companies that play in the region. But, it happened at a time of uncertainty. So there's going to be a journey ahead in terms of education, documentation, compliance. A lot of players probably already comply. Others will have to start thinking about their new products and more strategically about how they bring the USMCA into their supply chain work. So I think it's been a positive reception for the most part for what I have heard from customers and connections in the industry.
Great, positive developments, and thanks for clearing up a lot of the questions that people have about this and about the new agreement. I want to thank our four great experts today, Lou Longo and Alejandro Rodriguez of Plante Moran, and Dwight Morgan and Eugenio Calderon of M. Holland Company. We appreciate all the insights and what's in store for the USMCA and helping unpack it for our audience today and how it will affect plastics manufacturers. We also appreciate your attendance for this fireside chat, fueled by M. Holland and produced by Plastics News. If you want to revisit this chat, the entire event will be archived on the live stream webinar section of plasticsnews.com. Again, this chat and the others in our continuing series can be found on our website. Thank you for joining us today, and we're grateful for your support of our series of fireside chats in 2020. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.